this meeting from our end. So we'll see what we can do to get through this pretty quickly, but who knows? It all depends on you guys at that point. Our main parts for this is Sarah's going to give a presentation here at the beginning, and she can give a little background on that, at which point we're going to go into the milestones for the law, and we will need your input at that point for the steps to achieve these milestones, and what every party with their responsibilities should be at that point. We'll go over that. Shannon will be helping out and taking some notes here as we go. And Sarah, I'm actually going to turn a large portion of this over to her once I introduce each milestone as we go, since she is going to be putting together a lot of the back end stuff on this, and that way she has everything she needs at that point. To allow some more people to come onto this call, we're going to do our roll call for everybody after Sarah's presentation. That way it'll give everyone a chance to go on, and that's before the real business starts, putting together the milestone yard marks anyway. So at that point, Sarah, I am going to turn this over to you for your presentation.
Dave, Senator Augustine has his hand raised.
Sorry about that. Yes, sir. What can I do?
Thank you. I just wanted to take just a real short moment just to thank you all for your assistance and help in crafting the legislation that the legislature passed to create the program. I'm grateful for your partnership, and we will clearly grateful for your ongoing work that you're going to do to build this program. And so I just want to say thank you, and we'll keep working together as a resource with each other in this regard. So just thank you so very much. I just want to come and say that to you all. Thanks.
Thank you for that. Yeah, I think everyone here has done a great job for this. I mean, there have been some interesting discussions, let's just put it that way. And I think we've done great coming together for everything. So thank you for that.
Thanks. Have a good meeting.
Thanks. Sarah, you're up.
All right. Good morning, everyone. Can everyone hear me all right?
Yep.
Okay, great. Okay, so I'm going to give a brief overview of the statewide needs assessment. I do want to note that this is a brief overview, and as you all I'm sure have seen, the document, including the appendices, is many hundreds of pages long. So certainly not all of the material is captured in this presentation, but I did want to highlight a few things here. So starting with the waste characterization study, some things to highlight are that this study in 2024 included some more packaging specific material categories. The results showed that the largest categories by percent were organics and paper, including OCC. And then some changes to note from 2016 to 2024 are a really large decrease in the percent composition that is C and D, from 15% in 2016 to 8% in 2024. And then plastics, organics, paper, glass, HHW, and other wastes all increased as a percent of the overall waste stream. So as far as recycling rates by sector go, the lowest recycling rates were in the multifamily sector. Single family was next, and then commercial had the highest recycling rates. And of the 2.9 million tons of covered paper and packaging materials, and when I say covered, obviously the true covered list has yet to be determined, but 60% were generated in the commercial sector, 30% single family households, and 10% multifamily households. 89% of single family households reported were reported to have active recycling service, which means that a household has access to those recycling services. Either they are automatically provided with that, they're subscribing to that, or but like required to subscribe to that, or they're voluntarily subscribing. And that doesn't indicate whether or not they're actually using those recycling services, just whether or not they have access to them. Moving on to infrastructure and capacity, the existing capacity in the state includes a discussion about current processing. So that was 439,000 tons per year, as well as what the facilities are able to process at max capacity, which is an additional 71,400 tons per year. And then if we're looking at potential upgrades, that capacity could potentially increase by around 190,000 tons per year. Some other things that were noted in this section included transfer stations. There were 42 that accept recyclables generated in the state. Some of those were out of state. Organics processing facilities, 5 of those accept compostable packaging, and there are 2 who reported that they would plan to or would be interested in accepting compostable packaging in the future. And just to note, this is based off of who responded to these surveys. Just want to note that. Reuse, nearly 57 companies or organizations accept packaging related materials. And then for worker conditions, there were some identified concerns on the collection side and on the facility side. Some of the identified concerns on the collection side include transportation, broken air conditioning in vehicles, sparse PPE, and hot temperatures. And some of the concerns identified on the facility side include specific materials that are coming through, such as batteries, contamination, and then dangers involving hand-picking materials off of conveyor belts in MRFs that have less automation. And going back to this, the main idea, one of the main ideas in this section was just about some of the hazards and things that workers need to deal with. So minority-owned businesses make up 25.4% of companies in the state. And this section discussed EPR's potential to create business opportunities for those workers and generally incentivize and expand opportunities. And it also discussed the certification process, which I didn't list here on this page, but that is definitely something that was also included. Moving on to equity, I pulled some of the highlights out of that section. There were, I believe, more than what's listed here, but a few things that were listed include accommodating the elderly, especially in rural areas, translating outreach materials, providing multiple methods of recycling collection, and designing services to capture economies of scale, as well as really thinking about different regions, urban versus rural areas, more generally, more broadly, and structuring recycling programs according to the needs of the community. I think one of the other things that was mentioned was looking at regions that have very seasonal changes and how to deal with that. So the total value of recyclables disposed annually was found to range from 189.1 to 248.1 million. And cardboard and metal packaging were the materials with the most value disposed in landfills, but there's a whole list in that report of where those values lie for other materials as well. And then finally, to wrap this up, a well-designed program could increase the state's recycling rate for paper and packaging products from 34% to 50% or greater. And the study found that benefits under the modeled EPR system include $202 million of material value captured, a reduction of more than 1 million metric tons of carbon dioxide equivalent, and the creation of 2,075 additional jobs. And that is the conclusion of my very brief presentation. So I will open it back up to Dave.
Yeah, great. Any questions on the presentation at all? Chaz?
There's a lot of good stuff in the needs assessment, but there are also some glaring gaps. The data on MRFs in particular was sketchy at best, since apparently only 3 actual in-state MRFs responded. Will there be attempts to improve the data available in the needs assessment so it'll be something that we can work with more effectively? That's my first question.
The way I'll answer that is right now, the work that was done was all that was in the budget, and there is no more money to do anything else.
So we'll be groping like blind people or what? I mean, we need better data.
Well, and where, my question to you is, where do you think the data is lacking?
Well, for a start, the MRF data. There were 9 facilities cited, 4 were pick and bail, dump and bail, and 2 were out of state. So you only had 3 of the 7 MRFs in the state actually responding. And it just wasn't enough time, I think, for the MRFs to respond accurately and well. So, and I think it's going to be up to the PRO to figure out where they need more data and how to get it, if we're going to do this right and succeed.
Okay.
Dave, if I may chime in just to help, this is Michael Corafor. I think one of the things that, going forward, once we get into the operational phase of this initiative, is that the PRO would come back with some of the needs that may be necessary to make sure things are run efficiently. And that's part of the investment that will come from the money that will be collected, by the producers. So I think that's work to be done, but it doesn't negate the fact that we now have a foundation to start building on. It doesn't have to be perfect to start, but we'll perfect it as we go on this journey.
Okay, I agree. Peter?
Yeah, I was just going to ask if there's, do we have access to the raw data at all? I mean, partly I think I've expressed this to Bradley before, which is one season audits, can provide a bit of a look at what's happening. I'm just worried, I expressed the concern that the C&D data, it's likely because of when the audit was done, not likely because of an actual change from 2024. So it's just helpful for us to know how things compare season by season from the 2016 data to the 2024 data. So there's areas like that that would be helpful for us to sort of dig more into as we start to try to model and understand how to plan moving forward. The other piece that I just mentioned is I know that there were requirements to look at health and safety and a few other areas, multi-res. And I wasn't totally sure in the report if the commentary should be focused on the pro, meaning the pro should think about additional safety requirements in how they contract servicing, or whether this is an indication that there's a gap in safety that's being provided by the state in the requirements, labor requirements that they have in place.
I mean, we'll make note of this right now. I do know before the way the law was passed and everything for the funding, there was only enough money for a 1-season audit. So, that is going to, and, Brad specifically mentioned that to me yesterday when I talked to him, if someone brings that up. So I guess he may have been doing these long enough to foresee that question. So he knew that. For your health and safety, we will make that notation in here for your comment. Martha.
Yes, good morning. I'm thinking for a minute about this slide. I'm wondering to what extent the bill that passed, the assumptions under this program that was done by the needs assessment correspond to what was actually passed in terms of, inclusion or exclusion of different types of materials or generators or all of that, and the assumptions. Is there some possibility that someone at MDE could take a quick look at that, or that we could ask the needs assessment people to compare them?
Now, I will say this in general, and Sarah, you may know this part of this, and believe me, I'm not putting you on the spot. You'll understand when my answer here, but I will, say this at this point. Even though this this report that Sarah just went over was more general, it does it says the needs assessment. It does mention the materials specific for this law in the report multiple times. So it does cover it, even though this is more general. Sarah, can you answer more on the raw data part of it, side and everything else? Or I'm not even sure if the contractor is on who did this that can possibly answer that either.
That's going back to Peter's question, right, about raw data.
Yes.
Yeah, I'm not sure what. I'm not sure, but I can look into that. Eric,
Okay.
Go ahead.
Hi, everyone. Yeah, the needs assessment people are on the line. But thank you, everyone. I just want to, reiterate the introductory comments there. We're really excited to see that the law has made it as far as it has, and looking forward to seeing what happens. So, I heard a couple questions that maybe I could speak to, but Sarah, is there anyone that you'd want me to respond to in particular?
I'm gonna punt that actually over to Dave.
Yeah. I would just say the extent to the raw data is available at that point, and the material that's covered in there related to the law and the packaging at that point.
Sure. So in terms of raw data, there's a series of data sets, some of which is covered under non-disclosure agreements, including information provided by the haulers, as well as those organizations that are also operating MRFs. So the raw MRF data analysis is not going to be made available, although I can say that, and I can put this in the chat, just in terms of clarifying the number of MRFs that were engaged and that we were able to get survey information from, as well as do interviews to review that data. I think maybe it's a little bit more than what Chaz had indicated, but to his point, it was done on a very rapid time frame, and there's always getting more data and understanding the evolving needs of those facilities will only be beneficial. to the program as it moves forward. In terms of the raw data set for the waste characterization, the information there in terms of what's presented in the waste characterization report will be all that's available based on the way that the contracting was done. And that's a similar case for the modeling that was done to evaluate the numbers that are shown on the screen here in terms of this hypothetical EPR system, which I'll say is not exactly as the program is laid out in SB 901, but we were not able really to, I guess, coordinate closely with the selected pro in the development of it, or with the folks that were writing the law in order to provide what is hopefully just an objective look at what this potential program could provide to the state in order to support the development, which has now been the development of the legislation, which has now been signed into law. So I'd say there will need to be some, looking at the evaluation in terms of getting it trued up to what is now in the law in terms of like what Sarah had mentioned, the what will be covered materials, which was not determined at the time of the development of the modeling, as well as who is fully covered under it in terms of residential, commercial, multifamily. So, I'd say and Bradley kind of mentioned this at one point, no models are perfect, some are useful. I'd say that hopefully this, the approach that we took in the needs assessment was useful to get to where we are today. And we'll have to continue looking at that as we go forward.
Thanks, Eric. Great. Okay. If there's no more questions on this, Sarah, if you could take roll now so we can go into the second part of the meeting.
Absolutely. Give me 1 second.
Yeah.
I apologize.
And you can stop sharing when you get a chance then too.
Absolutely.
Sarah, I have it up if you'd like.
You have it? Great, Shannon. Thank you.
Sure. Just to verify, Lee Zimmerman is on the line. John Naiman is on the line. Frankie Sherman is not online. Chris Pilsner is online. Eileen Ko is online. Angie Webb is online. Vinny Bevavino is not. Michael Okorafor, Ellen Valentino, and William Singleton are all online. Mario Miner is not online. Scott DeFife is online. Abigail Stein and Delphine Cocker is not online. Peter Haregrave is. Chaz Miller is. Kelly Dordan is. Martha Ainsworth is. Crystal Faison, Michael Lambert, and Gaurshan Singh are not.
Thank you. All right. I was trying to think whether I was going to share this next document, and I think I'm going to. And I was going to just talk it through, Chaz. I can do that, but I think it might be helpful so you can see what I'm working off of. This is the milestones that is laid out, and it's what we are going to go over right now. And what I'm going to do is to do this. Let's find out. There we go. So everyone can see what we're going to go over here. There we go. And then I'm going to turn it over to Sarah for a large portion of this. But what we're going to do here are the milestones that are laid out as we went through this. And we would like the input for the steps to achieve these milestones as we go, and the responsible parties and whatever this as we go, and possibly some timeframes if you think that would be helpful. So the first one, which is due on July 1st of next year, is the pro submits the registration form that includes, you can see the producers, the brands, the materials covered, and the address and stuff, and the activities conducted by the three parties. And at this point, I'll turn it over to Sarah to see what she can gather from you guys about the milestones to reach this and what's necessary to reach this. So go ahead, Sarah, if you can see what we can get from it at this point.
Yeah, so I'm really just going to open it up to you all. This is your discussion, your time to discuss, and I will help facilitate. So if there's anybody who has thoughts about this, please feel free to share. Kick us off. Yes, Peter.
So I just want to make sure I understand in the law when the registration form comes in, is this like a high level that, here's the, in a number of states we've done a high level, which is here's our founding members and the brands that they cover and a list of covered materials that they include, or are you expecting every producer to register with us for that July 1st date? If it's every producer required to report to us, we need to know, and we need to know potentially reporting categories. So there's more work that needs to be done, just depending on what is the expectation.
Yeah, and while Sarah's taking this, I think that's the point of this right here. The law doesn't say we just do high level on 2026. Okay, so that's going to be my answer to that. So at that point, why the bulleted list here is the list of covered materials for each producer participating, and the brands and producers. So you are correct in your assessment. That is what does have to be determined, and that what is the recommendations we are asking for from this group right now of what the steps are to achieve this. Because like I said, the law does not make a distinction between just high level by the state or not. Scott?
Sorry, coming off of, these are the normal things that happen when a pro is chosen and producers have to start to register. I guess I had pulled up the bill to look back under. Does MDE need to, isn't the first step to pick a pro? An actual, not just for the advisory board, but to actually open up a RFP or whatever you need to do to get, PROs to actually submit. We have one here, but I think the specific, just officially, CAA was chosen for the advisory board, but I think you have to go through a process where you're going to have to open up a pro and you're going to have to set a deadline for producers that produce covered material to register into the state.
Okay, so that's the first step. Okay. And other than saying the sooner the better, what would be a good time frame to get that on board? We have the state contract process, obviously. So I guess we'll just put that on there as soon as possible for that.
Yeah. May I ask Peter how long it took him to round everybody up in Colorado? Or is the rounding still going?
Sorry, Scott, do you mean for getting brands to register?
Yes. How much time?
Yeah,
12 months.
We've got to get our registration system up and running. We may need, I'm just trying to think what we're going to need. We probably need an agreement that's going to be in place with those entities. So you're probably looking at least 4 or 5 months, at least to get that up and running.
Okay. Eileen or Ellen, excuse me.
Yeah, just quickly, and it's just not confrontational. It's just something I think we need to look into. The way the law reads is, I believe that the pro has been chosen, MDE has chosen it. I'm not sure there needs to be an RFP process, and I just think it's something we need to, look into. And MDE needs to look into. That's the way that I see things. But again, I'm not trying to stop democracy here for anybody that may want to raise their hand after what I say, but I think it's pretty clear that MDE had the authority to appoint a pro. They did. We have one. And to the extent that needs to be looked at, that's just the
and
way
when
I
I
read it.
said-
Thank you.
Right. And when I said what I did, I wasn't saying that we had to go through the whole process again. I'm just outlining the steps. And that's all I was saying at that point.
No,
So
no,
the
not,
pro-
yeah, Dave, not being, I just wanted to respond to those who thinks
Yeah.
potentially, and maybe that's what MDE does, but we have a pro. It was chosen and appointed by MDE. And I think that's where the authority lies.
Yeah. Okay. Chaz?
Ellen, I was just double checking that that was the case, and I'll be happy to read the law as it was passed as we sit here.
Sure. I don't think we need to do that, Scott. I'm just looking back to the law that passed previously and the authority of MDE not to have to go to RFP, but again, not trying to step on democracy here, Scott.
No, but MDE also needs to do regs. So, I mean, there's a lot that needs to get started.
Yep. Chaz?
Oh, Chaz, you're on mute.
Chaz, you're on.
Okay. Scott raised a great point. This may be a nit, but it's still a legal nit. MDE's got a lawyer. They can figure this out. They can figure this out quickly. On a practical level, CAA is the only PRO in the country. So
okay, I found this on the web for who's
Siri,
the only
shut
PR in
up.
the country.
Siri, worthless. And just resolve that and then look at some of the timelines. I also think that the experience in Oregon and Colorado, you've got the beginnings of a national PRO list. The issue will be we don't have that on the East Coast because I'm not sure how close Maine is to in the process.
No pro.
So the East Coast may add some additional producers who get to pay.
So from what we've heard so far, we're thinking it's going to take like 6 months or so to gather a list of everything. And then MDE's still got to, designate the pro or have it on board and everything to go at that point. No matter the circumstances behind that, with everyone's comments, what they've made. So, okay. Right.
Dave, just to add, and I will apologize. I feel like I'm mixing between multiple states on requirements on this, but so there's a question I think. So what we'll need by this time is obviously producers will need to know whether they're captured. So we'll need to understand exactly what the rules are in place. We'll need to go out to the marketplace and make sure that they understand who or who may not be captured. So they'll need clear guidance on the hierarchy. That should help, given we've got other states that are moving forward, but they'll still be potentially local to the Maryland market. We'll need. I haven't been able to look through the legislation quickly, but I can't remember whether we need to capture fees at this time. But if we need to capture fees, we will probably need some degree of reporting from those producers. So we'll need to know what information we're going to be gathering from them at that point. I don't know if there's consequences if producers don't register by the July 1st, 2026 timeline. So we'll need to understand exactly, to be able to speak to those, we'll need to understand what those consequences are. So I think there'll be quite a bit of work that'll need to be done in this period of time to work out the pro and MDE's requirements. So if there are compliance activities, MDE will need to know what those are, and CA will need to, or whoever the pro is, will need to know that interaction between, how that interaction is going to work. But we just need to make sure that there's time to actually get the rules in place. And the big thing is going to be the producer community needs time for us to get the information to them. And it just, we know this from Oregon, we know this from Colorado, that does take some time. to get the information in front of them, and then they need to go back if they're going to collect data, and they need to know what data they need to collect.
Okay. All right. And you know, and I'm going to say this again as we're going forward here. I am purposely being vague on my end, not because for any particular reason other than we're just trying to lay out the steps here and not the final, like, yes, we do or do not have a pro and stuff like that. I'm just trying to get the steps so we have that here laid out. And Peter, I know from what you said, you had said you probably estimate about 6 months to once we go to these companies to gather this information, which would give a lot of information of how quick MDE would have to turn around a lot of this stuff for you then at that point to get it in place by July 1st of next year. So, Scott.
Yes, I'm sorry. I just wanted to clarify. I'm not really trying to nitpick on whether CAAs you got to do anything or not. I mean, there's a legal. I mean, you'll figure that out. But you do need to tell the producer community that, hey, this is here's your deadline, and
okay.
You know you're covered. I mean, you got to put I mean, the pro.
No,
doesn't
I think that's. I'm glad you mentioned that. I think that's a good step to add there. No, I'm glad you mentioned that.
We have to notify the producer community of who's covered and what your deadlines are.
Okay.
Y'all got a lot
Okay.
of work to do.
Yeah. I won't make my comment, but okay. On or July 1st after 2026, producers may develop and operate an alternative collection program. What types of products would this include, and what would this look like? Sarah, go ahead.
Davis?
Shannon, yeah.
Yeah, can I just ask one quick question for clarification? I'm taking notes in the background, so I apologize for this question. Peter, can you clarify, when you were referring to the registration system up and running, are you referring to a standalone Maryland registration system or in general?
So it doesn't necessarily need to be. So if CA is the one that's implementing, we will need to add the option into our system. So we'll need to make IT upgrades to our system, and we'll need to get the various sort of documents put together that producer would need to go through.
Thank you for the clarification.
Great. Okay, so let's start with the first question here, and discuss what types of products this may include, an alternative collection program.
So I think there's lessons learned here that we can import. CA's been working pretty closely with some other pros in both Oregon around paint cans. I think paint cans are removed from this law, but as well as LPMA, which represents automotive products. So we would expect that they would probably look to have an alternative collection system in place. So I think there's lessons that we can pull over from this, from Oregon and Colorado, to inform this piece, but they would probably be a helpful entity to bring into the conversation.
Great. Okay. Does anyone else have any? Yes, Scott, go ahead.
Sorry, I'm gonna. I think alternative is doing a lot more work in this law than some of the other ones. There was not even. I think we have to look at the list create MDE's curbside list generation that's due in July of 2027. There is supposed to be a list about curbside, although we very specifically here at the Advisory Council did not define curbside as commingled to make sure that dual stream Montgomery County could still be curbside. But there's not a lot of talk about community collection or drop off or anything like that. I think anything that isn't curbside might fall under alternative, but this again is going to be a legal regulatory guidance from the department, at least in my opinion, but something that the regs would clarify.
Great. Okay. Definitely good to consider. Does anyone else have thoughts about this section? Okay. And I'm going to move on and open discussion to thinking about what this would look like, what developing, operating alternative collection program would look like in the system. And we can kind of blend that with the next piece that we'll talk about, which are those specific activities that each entity may need to do. Taz, go ahead.
It may simply be that we do not know enough about potential alternative collection to start answering some of these questions. They may be very, very, very premature.
And I think that's an okay answer right now, just as
Do we
from
have
my
any
point of view. Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay. All right, let's go to the next one then. See what we can do here. On or before July 1st, 2027, MDE develops a statewide list of covered materials. Go ahead, Sarah.
All right. So this is clearly something that MDE is responsible for. But I would still like to open it up to you all to discuss any thoughts that you may have about this. Yes, Chris.
So when we get to this item, before that, aren't we going to have to look at the infrastructure and see what facilities are out there, what they can accept? Because a lot of the processors that are out there are probably going to have to alter their operations when need the appropriate lead time. So I think going back to Chad's, first point, we definitely need some more data, a little more thorough. So just want to put that out there.
Great, thank you. Go ahead, Scott.
Yeah, I think this is where the needs assessment review, and I can suggest, although I know it's not exactly the same. I mean, this is where we can a little bit of learning from the other states who've gone through months and months of lists of material. I think we can start. I'm not saying that we have to start, but I think that CAA has had practice going through statewide lists, and that we don't have to start from scratch. We may be able to start from what is widely acceptable in the other states and then modify it to what's appropriate for Maryland. It may be faster than it took us months in Colorado. I don't know how long it took in Oregon, but.
And I got a question here before I call on Chris. Does everyone agree or disagree with Brad's comment there where he said this may need to happen before July of 2026 because the registration has a list of covered materials by producer?
Yeah, so if I can just add, so there's a question here as to what's meant by a statewide list of covered material. I would read it and say this is all of the materials that are designated under the program, not necessarily that are collected curbside. So I think there's a question on language, so it's clear, but I would have read this, I think, like Bradley's reading it, that this is what is actually designated under the program and what producers would report in. And so given that, if we have producers reporting potentially in 2026, that would mean this list would have to be established well before that date.
Good point.
Okay, does anyone else have thoughts about steps related to this?
And is that is this meant to be the collected at curbside list, or is this meant to be, Sarah, I apologies, I wasn't in the drafting, but is there clarity that's known as to intent as to what this is meant to refer to?
To what is to refer to? Sorry, I understood your question. I just didn't know specifically what you're referring to.
So is this a what must be collected curbside? Is that what this list refers to, or does it list or refer to the list of all the different types of reporting categories for covered materials?
I
It
thought
says
myself
curbside.
it was the entire list.
Sorry, let me raise my hand.
Go ahead, Scott. Just go ahead.
Reading from page 44 of Senate Bill 901, on or before July 1st, 2027, the department shall develop a statewide list of covered materials determined to be recyclable or compostable through curbside recycling programs.
Oh,
That's why I was suggesting alternatives doing a lot of other work, right? Because if it's not curbside, if it's drop off, there's a list of covered materials that are recyclable, and then there's a list of covered material or materials that are covered, and then there's covered materials that are recyclable curbside. So to a certain extent, you're covered, you're recyclable, you're curbside. If you're not curbside, you're alternative. The regs have to figure this. The regs have to provide some clarity here.
Okay.
But essentially,
Sarah, hold on. Go ahead. Sorry. Go ahead.
Sorry, Dave. I think essentially it still means you still have to have that list put together ahead of time, because if you need it for reporting, you'll need to be able to parse it out afterwards. So yeah, we may need this ahead of time regardless.
Okay. Guys, before we move on, you got something?
No.
Okay.
I mean,
Sarah, you want to take the next
you
one?
could shortcut it looking at the larger curbside programs, and you're going to get probably 95% of the materials. And the question though becomes the outliers that,
Yeah. All right, Sarah, you might as well just take the next one and read it. It's quick. So go
Sure.
ahead.
Yeah. Okay. So the next one is about the pro submitting their plan to MDE. What do we think needs to happen in order to get there? Yes, Peter.
So the pro obviously needs to go to the marketplace. There's probably updates that need to be done to the needs assessment. The pro will need to engage the advisory board as we go through that process. So I think we have some practice on this in other states. So we'll need to set up a schedule as to the pro reporting back to and presenting elements of the program plan before a draft is fully submitted by July 1st, 2028. And I guess, obviously the regulations need to be set out so that the pro has clarity. There will be obviously areas where more detail is necessary for the pro to be able to submit a program plan.
Yeah, very good to include.
All right, let's go to the next one.
All right.
On or before January 29, service providers seeking reimbursement will register with MDE.
All right. What are some steps that need to happen in order to reach this milestone? Yes, Peter.
So again, I haven't had a lot of time to think about this, but I'm assuming potentially there likely will be a need if the pro is looking for potentially including standards around labor and things like that, ensuring that data. So there'll need to be a set of requirements that the pro obviously will set out in their program plan, and which the MDE will then, I assume, need to include as part of their registration process to make sure that they're capturing that information.
Great.
You can keep going if you'd like. We're because
Okay.
these are shorter. So
All right.
I didn't get that. Could you try again?
So next is the PRO's annual report. Yes, we'll move on to that one. Steps to achieve that milestone. Anything anyone's thinking of that might, that might get in the way of that or prevent us from getting there as well. Generally across all of these.
My only comment to
go ahead.
this, and Peter, maybe you can answer this or whatever at that point is, based upon feedback, which obviously you'll get on an annual report from us to make edits. How soon prior to that deadline should a draft be submitted to MDE in order to assume you could turn it around with the edits to make corrections so it could be submitted by July 1st? That's the question I'm going to throw out for this one.
I'm not often familiar with drafts of an annual report being put in. Usually it's an annual report that it's submitted, but I mean, the pro is going to need time to get the data back from the service providers. If there's a requirement to audit that data, we'll need time to do that audit work. We'll need time to potentially, lay the information out in an annual report, and then that report would be submitted. Again, I'm not familiar with the need to hand in a draft, but that's something we could certainly talk about.
Yeah, and there may not be. It's just something I'm throwing out for a worst case scenario at that point. Scott?
Scott, sorry, and then Chaz.
I can let Chaz go first if you want.
No, that's fine. Maybe I'm missing something. When did collections actually begin?
Well, see, I don't think you're missing something, Chaz. I was going to point out something similar.
PRO's got something to report on.
The
report's supposed to be what they've collected and processed or what? And there's nothing here that says when this program kicks off at the curbside, at the recycling center, etc.
That is the same point I was going to make, and I think Peter's confusion on the plan and the report is I don't see a specific date for the plan, the pro plan, to be submitted, and I don't see a specific date for producers to pay fees.
Oops.
So if the service providers who are seeking reimbursement aren't registered until January 1 of 2029, it's hard for me to understand how anything's going to happen before January of 2020. Any service covered under the law is going to be provided before January 1st, 2029. I may be missing something, but I've been looking for all the dates that I can look for. Well, never mind. I'm going to shut my mouth after that about anything that was happening the past 2 weeks. So.
Would those, that and Shannon just made a point to me, would those be in regs that we develop at that point?
I think they're going to have to be now, Dave, because they're not in the statute.
Okay.
I don't know if you can put a start date in a reg, and maybe legal counsel is going to have to jump in here. This may be an inadvertent omission from the bill, but I do think it's important to have a date when this thing is supposed to start. I saw somebody put something about cost.
And if we would have to do something like that, what would be a suggested date for the start?
Well, look, I'm just opining here. If the date for service providers to register is January 1, 2029, I don't know that you're going to have, if you want, I think the MDE has to either figure out when the program actually starts and then work backwards from there. When do you want it to start? You want it to start on January 2nd, 2029? I mean, I'm not trying to be difficult. I am just literally, it was, reviewing the law. Some of us were making some suggestions, but, there was a point at which there was no more.
Well, no, and that's why I was asking. I mean, we could always make the determination at that point, but it's also part of this whole group to, with recommendations for when maybe we would like to see it start too. And that's what I was asking at that point.
You're going to need to pick a date sometime in 2028. Or, I mean, actually 2020, you're either going to have to, it either has to be after January 1st, 2029, because that's in statute for service provider registration. But the pro plan has to be submitted before the service provider registration is finished and before the plan actually kicks off and people have to pay fees.
Okay. Chaz?
At least in, the way things have gone in the other.
Yeah, no. This is all good stuff. That's good,
I think
Chaz.
Scott's brought up some good points, and candidly, none of us have the answer right now.
Okay.
This is not the first time there's been imperfect legislation, and things just got messed, and we've got to figure out. I'm sure MDE legal counsel will have some suggestions.
Okay. Michael?
Sure, Dave. I think, my suggestion would be, as you can see, there are a few things that are not clear. That's the kind of thing that MDE can also, with advice from legal counsel, just review and come up with a timeline as a beginning discussion for the advisory council to weigh in. I don't see it as a game changer, something that will slow things down, but this is just take it under advisement, go back, and maybe when we meet next, just come back with some proposals that we can just weigh in on.
Okay. All right.
Dave, the good news is you all brought this up 3 days after the legislation finished. So we're able to identify issues like this that need to be fixed. So I think this is very good in that context. I'd rather find out these problems today than 2 years from now.
Okay, good. The last three things on the list, I'm going to group these all together since they are so far in the future. And my only comment with any of those, and and Sarah can see if you guys have anything else, but my only comment for all of those is there anything based upon what we did this time, like a time frame, like we would want to start the new needs assessment for 2034 to maybe do things we weren't able to do this time around? And that's what I'm looking at, is probably more of timeframes of, when we would like to start these things rather than so many details, because we're talking 8 years out at this point.
Go ahead,
Michael.
Sure. Dave, I think that's a very good question. The bottom line is you need to fund that needs assessment. Unless you think you're going to come up with a budget, I would say let's get going with both the PRO and the manufacturers as they start to pay into it. Then you have the funding that you can use to do additional needs assessment, unless you believe you can get money from the state to do that, because it has to be funded. And the more we put some thought into it, as we go into this enhanced needs assessment work, it will be easier to get something that is pertinent data that will cover everything. The good news is we have time. So that's my recommendation, is that we get going, and maybe as we collect money, as the PRO collects money, that will be the kind of thing they will fund.
Anything else from anybody on the last three? Okay. All right. I am going to, before we open this to the public for final things, is there any other questions or anything from the council or anything that wants to be raised at this point?
Martha has her hands up.
Martha.
Hi, thanks, Dave. Could you just enlighten us, give us an overview of what the process of rulemaking is in Maryland and how much it takes, what the steps are? Because I think a lot of this timeline depends on rulemaking. And I don't have any sense of kind of the feedback from the public, how many days have to elapse and all of that in order for something to actually be.
Are you talking, so you're talking regs for rulemaking?
Yes, the reg,
Yeah.
right. There are a lot of regulations that have to be written here by MDE, obviously.
Here's the thing.
Just not clear to me how long we should allow.
I'm sorry, go ahead.
No, how long one should allow when you're talking about timelines and also the opportunities for public input.
Here's the thing. Whenever we've done stuff in the past related to regs, we like to give ourselves, upwards of a year to get them pushed through for everything. Okay, that gives us a chance to write them here, the public comment periods. If they're as a result of public comments, we get major feedback where we have to put them out again for whatever reason, and then go through everything. So, I know in past bills we've always asked for, when regs are requested, we always ask for like a year to do them. That's not to say they can't. That's not to say they can't be done quicker if they're rushed, but to do it comfortably, I would suggest a year.
And Martha, Dave is referring to start to finish, just to clarify.
And so when would you anticipate, because there's a lot to be done here, when would you anticipate starting that regulation writing? Do you have a timeline for that?
As it is now for the current one.
Mm-hmm.
That's one of the questions that we had asked earlier of, for deadlines of what we think. I would say here, as soon as possible, once the law, because we don't do anything, even though it's out of committee, everything is ready for the governor to sign. We don't do anything till it's signed. It's just it's a policy that we do just in case something weird happens at that point. But I would suggest that, MDE would probably start at looking, once we have the information required to do that, as soon as possible after that to get those in place.
And then there would be opportunities for members of the advisory council or members of the council to submit suggestions.
And that's and that's one reason why we put a year in there for all the comments and everything else. Yes.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah. Now I know during the initial, it would be up to Brad to determine at what point involvement is brought in with everything, but all interested parties would get a chance to comment.
And the public comment period is typically how much time?
Oh God, off the top,
Small business is 15 days. General is 30.
Yeah.
Okay.
Thanks, Shannon. I forgot. I was drawing a brain fart.
Mm-hmm.
Any other questions? Good. Public, anything for the public to raise anything?
Hell, yeah, I again, appreciate the discussion. A couple things that I wanted to just kind of raise for this group's attention. There's a lot of existing reporting that's done, and I know Dave and Sarah, you're probably knee deep in that as it comes to the 2024 report related to disposal in the state, and just think that there's either potential opportunities to leverage that or to make sure that as the rules are made for this EPR program, that they don't either contradict or conflict with each other, and there can be some kind of harmonization there as things go forward. And then to Pete's point about what is the pro's responsibility, or how do they need to get into labor and safety laws? I think would be a critical consideration in terms of determining whose roles and responsibilities are to make sure that additional collection infrastructure doesn't cause increased safety concerns, because there are a lot when we looked into it, and they're happening all the time. In Baltimore, in particular, folks that are getting run over or suffering from heat illness. And I know that that's a major topic over the past year. So not suggesting that it needs to be the pro's responsibility entirely, and I think that's kind of where Pete's coming from, but definitely something that I think this group can help weigh in and consider how to increase recycling, but do it in an increasingly safe way. Thanks.
We will record that question also, Chaz. For anyone that did not see Chaz's question, he typed in.
That's the heart of the beast.
Yeah.
How can you pay people in the middle of 28 if they don't have to register until the 1st of 29? And I don't know how you get around that little problem. I don't think there's any clarity, unfortunately, on when this program begins at the curbside. And we need that.
All right, Scott.
I agree with Chaz. I left the stakeholder discussions and the thorough walkthrough thinking that July 1, 2028 was the start date, but there's some dates that aren't corresponding with that in actual statute.
Now, arguably, this can be fixed quickly in the next session, but everybody hates to fix a bill.
Yeah, I mean, a three-year time frame from enactment to the beginning of the program, I think, is kind of normal in the somewhere in between the Colorado and Minnesota timeframes. And to the extent that Senator Augustine was trying to follow the Minnesota model, there's some instruction there. I just think maybe there's the 2029 date for service provider registration didn't get fixed when the other dates were getting fixed. But that's just, the law's passed, so we got to.
If nothing else we accomplished today, we got a good bug, let's call it. We pulled out here to see what we have to do with it. So
yeah.
All right. Anybody else? All right. Brad will be in touch if a new meeting has not been set up. I'm not sure whether he has already. If not, he will be in touch. And thank you, everybody, for their input.